to the Secrets of Happily Ever After podcast. I'm your host, Monica Tanner, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my new friend, Johanna Lynn. Johanna is the founder of the Family Imprint Institute with an international private practice. Science tells us that our biography becomes our biology. Your family lives on within you. Think of it as your emotional inheritance. And these imprints continue to influence you. The good news about epigenetics is that you can release how you hold the past within. Johanna provides solutions for the emotional patterns we all inherit from our families. Welcome, Johanna. How are you doing?
I'm great, Monica. Nice to connect with you.
Yes, very good. So, for those of you who don't know you well, how did you become so obsessed with epigenetics and family dynamics?
Well, I think I've always been fascinated by people, why we do what we do, why we pick certain partners, and why certain habits are so hard to step away from for some people. And then epigenetics led me down this whole road of all that we inherit from our family of origin and how that shapes our perspectives and how we show up in relationship. And it's been a love affair ever since.
Very good. So, can you start by giving us just like a simple definition of epigenetics for those of us who are new to the kind of theory or thought?
Yeah, I like to use a computer analogy. It's like we share an operating system with our parents and our grandparents, and we really aren't born with a clear hard drive. We really are coming from a place of their experiences and what's unresolved for them. I love to think of it like the intelligence of the human body, and almost like we're born prepared to deal with the challenges that our parents or grandparents overcame. And the challenge where we kind of hit a roadblock there is, let's say we're living in a very safe, very prosperous community, but we're still living in the hypervigilance of, let's say, our grandfather who went through a war-torn situation, or our father who didn't feel safe at school. And we don't know why we don't feel safe, because everything in our reality shows us we should, but we can't seem to shake that feeling.
Interesting. And so,
Mm.
what do you think influences relationship choices on a subconscious? Like, how does this work as adults now that we're more aware of, what's kind of being imprinted on us? But
So we fall in love with the familiar as much as we might tell something very different to a dear friend about who we'd ideally love to be in relationship with. But we end up falling in love with what feels known. So we had that immediate click with someone that we, just seem to vibe with. And then it takes a little bit of time until some of those relating patterns show up as, oh, you're really critical, just like my mom, or you're kind of absent and maybe prioritize work or travel or soccer ahead of me feeling like I'm important. And so we kind of bump up against those places that we know in our body. And I like to think that our relationships are this beautiful way to release what we've been carrying inside that we kind of didn't even know was there until those buttons got pushed. So we can heal them. We can be free of them.
yeah, that's so cool. So I was just
Mhm.
really talking about this with a friend the other day. So I wonder
Hmm.
if you can like make sense of it for me. So I
Okay.
was taught because in my work, I have noticed that opposites often attract. I mean, you hear that
Yes.
said all the time, but I really do find that to be true. A lot of times couples will come to me and they have the opposite view of a lot of things. And I mean, that is in my own marriage. My husband and I have very different ways of seeing the world and opinions about things. We were raised very differently. But one thing I noticed is that my like kind of core wound of growing up was this abandonment, right? Like I felt like I had to earn love or, people in my family, I think were kind of quick to give up on something. And I've noticed that my husband, that's healed because my husband never had that. Like my husband is so just steady Eddie. And when I would kind of freak out and be like, I don't deserve this. Like, I'm just ready for him to walk out the door. He was always like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, yes, this is a difficult challenge for us, but I'm not going anywhere. And so I
Mhm.
feel like that trust and all of it. And I could never have known that when I chose him.
Right.
but he did really, you know, in all the ways that we're different and all the challenges that we've kind of overcome together, he was never like my what I expected, that I had to earn this love from him, or if I screwed up enough times he would just take off, or those
Mm.
types of things. He really overcame that for me.
Oh, beautiful. You reminded me of a book I read, and I think it was, and they talked about different people coming together in relationship with different attachment patterns. And
Yes.
so, if we've got high abandonment fear, this, I'll do anything as long as you don't leave me. I'll
Yes.
just,
Yes.
hive off parts of myself as long as we can keep this together. And so that high abandonment feeling can interrupt that connection, especially if our other side, let's say, didn't do what your husband did, because that's what creates that deep, deep, secure attachment over time, moving through the challenges together. And what's so interesting in the studies that they showcased in this book is that those of us who have anxious attachment or insecure attachment, we can actually arrive into that secure attachment camp by being healthily loved in our primary relationship. So this is where things can really shift and change. And we kind of know, oh, I can say that difficult thing, or I can broach that difficult topic, and I really feel in my body he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so that can be so beautifully healing. And now your relationship sits on more solid ground. So to me, that was such a surprise to read their research. And I just thought, well, that's great news.
Yeah. But it kind of goes against sort of the common, what's talked about there is that we kind of marry our wounds. And so that's what makes it so difficult. And so I just wonder, like, how did I get so lucky? Because I feel like I married the opposite of my wound.
So my guess is there are many elements in your husband that are still familiar.
Hmm.
That's what would have attracted
Yes,
to
you're
you him in
probably
the
right.
first place.
Mhm.
And so I think there can be cases where maybe you like to feel good about this, that you did enough of your own work, you did enough of your own being able to receive the healthy love, that because I work with a lot of couples, and at the beginning she'll say, or he'll say, I was bored. This seemed too healthy. This seemed, where's the drama? Because that was familiar. That if we argue, if you really come to the bat, I know you love me. And
Right.
yet, most of us, as we get a little older anyway, we want that calm, we want that peace, we want that connection we can count on. So, my guess, it was a little bit of both for you. There are elements of familiar, and you likely did the work to receive healthy love.
I think you're probably right about that, because my
Mhm.
parents divorced when I was 12, and I literally was like, from that moment on, like obsessed with healthy, thriving relationships, right? So all of my study in college was all around that. So I tried to like give myself every advantage. But when push came to shove in our marriage, I did kind of go back to those wounds and those coping strategies that didn't work, but he didn't go anywhere. Like I think I like was like I made it enough of a priority that he wasn't going to go anywhere. To
Uh-huh.
be able to do my own work within the marriage, to realize, and now we have a very solid, secure, like, we can be very intimate and very open and trusting, because I do have that assurance now. I'm like, okay, he's shown me he's not going anywhere, and I've been able
Oh,
to like resolve all that. I have to earn this love, and I have to be perfect, and it's not going to work, and those, I didn't,
yeah.
obviously, when I got married, I didn't feel like that was there, but in the thick of marriage and childbearing and all of
Yeah.
those things, it came up, and it came up hard.
Uh-huh. And I think that is the best. That is like what we all want to go for, the healing of our own stuff inside the beautiful container
Yeah.
of that trusting relationship. And
Yeah.
so I think it kind of goes on one end or the other end of that spectrum, where we're doing just what you described in your marriage. Or the challenge can be the patterns agitate each other and we kind of come apart. And sometimes, I went through a divorce personally, and it was only until the other side, like in the heartache of the breakdown of the relationship, that I could sort of look at, ooh, the parts of myself that contributed to that, what felt like, I guess, through discernment, that's not the right partner for me because this and this is how it sort of edged together. And I think I learned the most about myself in that really difficult time, kind of rebuilding from the ground up. And so, isn't it funny that we as humans, we kind of go to one end of the spectrum or the other, where we, as long as we can learn and build from that place, that's where we don't repeat it over and over again.
So interesting. So speaking of that, how do our earliest experiences, and I actually can answer this question pretty good for myself, but how do our earliest experience influences how we show up in relationship? Because that is so prevalent. I see that all the time.
Yeah. From my experience, and I know I really see it from the sort of family history
Yeah.
systems lens, is our first love is our mom. And
Mm,
so how receptive she was to us, or, and sometimes there were things that were outside of mom's control. She had to go right back to work, or gosh, grandma gets a scary diagnosis and it kind of pulls her attunement offline. And it's never about blaming our moms. It's just about understanding where maybe our attachment cup didn't get the full connection of what we needed. And so this becomes a baseline for how we trust love, for how we show up in relationship, what we feel we can express as a boundary, or how far we might go in our communication. It all sort of guides from this unconscious place, like a body memory kind of place. And so our first love, our mom, becomes our template for how future relationships unfold. And so a lot of the times when I work with couples, there's this sort of premise in our philosophy that systems marry systems. And so where's that overlap? Again, where's that familiarity? How did you guys fit like a puzzle piece?
mhm.
And now we want to look at both sides, early life experience, for how they're navigating intimacy, and even when I'm supporting couples through their divorce proceedings, how they're navigating separation. Can I stay open even when it hurts? Can I own my part instead of just staying in blame and hurt? They're both such tender areas. Either we deepen intimacy, or it's coming apart, and it's all from that foundation.
Yeah. So how do we, I mean, is there a way we can kind of detect what's happening? Like, see it happening as the pattern and shift it or
Good question. I think the more we can know about our early life, the better.
Mhm.
I've worked with many clients who, they're in their 40s, 50s, life's humming along. And you say, what was going on for your mom when she was pregnant with you? Oh, like, I have no idea. I never thought of that. Or were there any medical interventions or moments when you were separated from your mom, sort of at birth or the first few weeks of life? Gosh, I have no idea. I'd have to ask her. And those of us who are lucky enough to still have our moms here, that we can kind of gather some of that information. But so much of that, I'm going to say the first 5 years of our life, that is really the set point or the foundation for our relational health, how safe we feel giving and receiving love. And so I kind of do a bit of a detective history work and look at that first 5 years to find out as much about the facts of mom's pregnancy, the delivery, what happened in the first 5 years, to get the lay of the land for how things are going today in some of the relationship challenges that they're up against.
Really interesting. So let's talk about love blueprints and how we can enhance the love that flows into our relationship, even using this information.
Yeah. I think the more empowered we are about our past, the more we can connect the dots. Oh, that's why I'm reacting the way I'm reacting. Or um, maybe we know we've fallen in love with someone who travels for work, but here they go again on their second trip this month, and we're shutting down and we're feeling resentful. And so let's look at it not being about the logistics of the distance, but let's look about what in your love blueprint does that mean for you. And so, which parent was disconnected? What part maybe we feel disconnected from ourselves? And how are we building our own health in love from inside without needing our partner to sort of prop it up, or to make us feel okay within that close proximity? So I think the good news is, whatever sort of agitates us or triggers us is this beautiful open door towards really understanding what it's connected to, so that we can solve it right at the root, right at the origin of where it started. I typically think we don't get much traction in just talking about, why this is hurtful or why this bothers me. We've really got to get to why it's a trigger, and heal it from that place.
That's really interesting. So you talk about attachment, but like, what if one partner has a greater need for, connection and closeness in a relationship, and the other partner has a greater need to have their own space or autonomy, or how does those things even have anything to do with, knowing what happened to us when we were younger?
Yeah. I laugh almost at that question because it's such a common dynamic. I see it
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
often. And so
Part of
those
that opposites attract, right? It's like,
100%, yeah. And so those of us who have that greater need for closeness, again, we want to recognize it's almost like we've got three situations here. We've got our history and needs, our
Mhm.
partner's history and needs, and then the health of the relationship. So we
Mhm.
can kind of separate it out as three moving parts, and to honor if you're the one that has more of that need for closeness, to really drop into where does that come from. And the term we use in my work is a break in the bond. Those of us who really want to be close need to talk about it right away, have a really hard time tolerating separation. Again, it comes from a loss of connection with mom in the early years. And unconsciously, I'm wanting my partner to fill that gap that's been kind of there and growing for 20, 30 years, however old we were before we got together. And we've got to be able to give to ourselves what we'd always wished mom could give, give to ourselves what we would hope our partner would give, which includes buying yourself the flowers, booking yourself the weekend away to replenish, and not simply waiting for them to read your mind or fill the gap.
Mhm.
And so there's this place where we just recognize here's a part of what was left over for me, and I can't expect my partner will know how to fill those spaces. Now,
Yeah.
the partner that needs more space, that usually comes from a family dynamic where they were highly inundated, either inundated by one parent's expectations that you've got to be the footballer like I was, or you've got to be an academic like I was. And so there's this pressure to be something other than just who you are. And in more complicated situations, the inundation comes from a really needy mom who kind of leaned those needs into the developing child. And in a way, we leave our developing sense of self to be over there with the parent, trying to prop them up to make them happy or proud or something to kind of jostle them out of their stuck place. And any one of us knows who raises children, our problems are adult problems. There's nothing really a child could do to make it better. And so then we're going to be highly aware, like at a body memory of the natural needs of our partner, and want to get some space from that. And so that can be a real dance between the repair of I didn't get enough of what I needed to too much was expected or required of me. And it, again, opposites attract, and we see this pairing up happen very often.
So true. So what can be done if you can't get on the same page with your partner and you know, you're clashing, attacking, withdrawing, any of those kind of negative patterns of interaction?
Yeah. I think first we've got to kind of stop and pull back and recognize all of those things that you just mentioned, sort of the classic harms in relationship. I sort of think of it like we've got a sturdy tree, which is the beginning of our marriage, and we've got all the hopes. And any one of those things is like taking the axe to the tree. And we all know the tree can only take so many axe cuts. And so every time we respond in that way, it's another hit. And so we've got to have enough of that. I'm not even sure the term, I guess the ability to pull back and really self-reflect. I think an action step that can be there beyond just, breathing and try to find your ground again is to do something that looks like the work that I do with my clients in filling out a generational genealogram. So first for yourself and then for your partner. So really starting to look at, okay, how would I describe my mom? And I'm looking for adjectives. I don't want the story and this happened here. When I was 7, that happened there. We really want to get beyond the blame or the hurt and just facts. So my mom was always there, or my mom had to work 3 jobs. My mom was quick to anger, or my mom was as patient as a saint. So we're trying to really get an image or a picture of how the body holds our mom and dad. And
Mm.
then we do
That
the same
might not
for
even be the reality, but how we experienced our mom.
as a child. So
Mhm.
not how the relationship has grown and evolved as an adult, but
Mm.
the, let's say, under 10 relationship that you remember about your mom. Because some
Interesting.
of us, gosh, mom was an alcoholic when I was growing up. She's been sober for 20 years, but my body remembers the inconsistency and the sometimes she was there and often she wasn't. And that's the relationship blueprint. That's where we're getting that unconscious reference point for how we show up now in relationship.
So you're not saying that that's necessarily how we show up because that's how they showed up. It's just affecting how the triggers or different things that we respond or react to in our relationship.
So there's nuances there. So let's say we use that example. Mom was an alcoholic. She's now sober. The relationship is good today, but I remember when I couldn't count on her.
Mhm.
And I've got themes showing up in my relationship where I just can't count on him. Maybe he's just honestly forgetful. It's not doesn't have to be deceitful or something bad, but the feeling is I can't count on him.
Mhm.
And so then we know there's a match there. So oftentimes it's less about what happened to us and it's more about how we've made sense of it, of
Yeah.
whether or not it's going to repeat again. So if we have our heart closed to our parent and maybe we're still really stuck in blame or hurt or any one of those things, it's more likely to live out again in our current relationship or as we parent our kids. If we've come to peace with it, if we perfectly understand, oh gosh, of course mom was struggling with alcoholism. When I think about what happened with her mom, of course she was numbing. We build the larger context.
Yeah.
Then it's much less likely to replicate.
That's so interesting because I really have seen that play out in my life. Is the one who
Mm.
helped me resolve so much of the pain that I was feeling in my relationship was my mom. And it was like the understanding of how she got to be who she was and how, my grandma got to be who she was, like really not as formal as you're describing it, but it was just
Mm.
really a matter of understanding that everybody in my genealogy just did the best that they could. And
Yeah,
that's all that I can do as well. And it
yeah,
just made it a lot more like I'm not destined to repeat the pattern anymore. Like I get to choose now.
that's right. It gets to be complete and back there, and I get to choose from a different place.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Mhm.
powerful. Awesome. Well, Johanna, this has been amazing. If you could share the most important thing, like just anything out of your library of knowledge that would be the most important thing my audience can do to live happily ever after, what would be that thing?
Oh my gosh, that's hard to distill down. Um, I think a big thing, I write a lot and I teach a lot about boundaries. I think that is an essential, sometimes invisible piece of what has a relationship go really well. So to pay really close body attention to where you're sort of on the edge of your boundary. And what I mean by that is where I kind of stop being myself,
Mm,
where I step into who do I think this person needs me to be,
mhm.
because whenever we're up against being our honest self, living with that authenticity and risking attachment, attachment seems to always win to the detriment of the relationship. So, how
Interesting.
can you be yourself and honestly share what's happening for you, even if it rocks the boat a little bit? Because I
Mm.
think those are the groundbreaking conversations we have with our spouse that get into the heart of the matter instead of just, sidestepping this conflict and that one. And then before you know it, we've got so much stuff under that proverbial rug that there's no going back.
That's so interesting. I call that differentiation. Is that what you call it?
No, I don't. I think because I'm very body based, I do a lot with a lot of us have learned to build our boundary from the outside in. Like, oh, mom said I did good on my test, or dad said I was well behaved, or whatever this early childhood stuff is. And so
Uh-huh.
that's how I shape myself to be. And so
Okay.
a lot of the times when we're an adult, and especially when we want to have thriving, loving relationships, from the inside out, does this conversation work for me? Do I feel loved and respected? Is this person my soft place to land? What can I do on my side to improve that? and what needs to be communicated about that doesn't feel loving to me. And they can be some really edgy conversations, but that's what brings us closer to intimacy and connection and a thriving love.
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Can you tell the listeners where they can learn more about I'm going to say it wrong.
Epigenetics.
Epigenetic. I'm like, oh dear, I need help. Yes. Can you tell the listeners where they can learn more about epigenetics and family systems and all the work that you do?
Absolutely. It's johannalynn.ca. So just my name.ca, because I'm from Canada. And even mispronouncing epigenetics is because it is such a new thing to learn about. That's why this conversation is so important. So thank you for having me as a guest.
You bet. To learn more ways to deepen your intimacy and strengthen your relationship, make sure you watch this video next